Okay, so the bathroom remodel continues, and as a result of demolition, well, we've got a few holes in the wall that need to be fixed. So that's what we're going to tackle on this episode of DIYnot, drywall repair. So before we move on from demolition, we've got some simple wall repair that we need to do, and that's what we want to cover today. If you take a look around the room, you can see that we've got quite a few different types of holes. We've got smaller holes where some drywall anchors were mounted for a mirror, for example. Now my wife and I, we're over 6 foot tall, so the mirrors here hit us somewhere in here, super inconvenient. So we want to raise the mirrors, which also meant we needed to raise the light fixtures. So we've got a really big hole here where the light fixture used to be. So we've got some big holes and we've got some small holes out here. And then of course, there's the closet. Now we've got a lot of stuff to deal with in here. And we'd already ripped out all the old shelving material in here, and that left us with a lot of nail holes in the wall, for example, and some areas where glue pulled off some of the drywall. That's going to have to be patched. And then of course, we've got some bigger holes as well. Like over here in the corner, we've got a bigger piece that just got pushed in by a pry bar or a hammer, for example. So, long story short, we got a lot of holes in walls that need to be fixed. And you can use different techniques to fix all of these, and that's what we want to show you today. First thing you're going to need is some joint compound. This will help make those holes disappear. In order to use your joint compound, you're going to need some basic tools, like a mud tray and a mud knife. A mud knife is a lot like a putty knife, just a little bit wider and more flexible. Next, I recommend a roll of fiberglass mesh tape. Now there's also paper tape, but the fiberglass mesh tape is especially useful when we're patching holes. Drywall repair is a multi-step process. It requires sanding between each one of those processes. So obviously you're going to need something to do that sanding with. Finally, you're going to be kicking up a lot of dust. So a shop vac is pretty much an essential tool. Like I said, we've got a lot of different holes that we need to tackle here on this project, but I want to go ahead and get started here in the closet for a couple of reasons. One, the holes are a little bit smaller, so they should be the easiest to fix. But two, I've got a lot of them, so I've got a lot of work to do in here. First thing I like to do before I even get any mud in the bucket is I like to knock down any pieces of paper that might be raised up on the wall here. And the reason for that is, so when I start mudding, it's going to drag that paper in the mud and I'm not going to get a very smooth finish. Okay, that should just about do it. One of the other things you may have noticed I was doing, I was hitting the wall with my mud knife here. A lot of good ones have a solid end on them, so if you have a nail head that's popping out, like I have a couple here, you can tap on them, get those pushed back in, and then you can just fill in that divot with some mud. So, next step, let's get some mud in our pail and start covering these up. Now, most of these holes are pretty easy. I can just throw some mud over them and we'll do a couple of coats and they'll be fine. Some of the bigger holes will take a little bit more work than that, and I'll show you that here in just a second, but let's get started with the easy stuff, shall we? Just throw a little mud right on your knife, spread it right over those holes, wipe off your knife, hit the next set. Now, here in this corner, we've got a section where our hammer or our pry bar pushed through the wall when we were removing the shelving material. And you can see there's just a little bit of push there. Now I'm not going to take that drywall out because I think I can fix it without doing a drastic repair. So let me show you how to do that. This is where that fiberglass tape comes in handy. It's a real simple piece of tape. It's a mesh made out of fiberglass and it's a little bit sticky so it sticks to the wall. I'm going to go ahead and just take a couple strips off real quick, and then we'll just place it over that crack. Now I've cut several so that I can get right into that corner and overlap it a couple of times. And the goal is to give me a firm space for my drywall mud to stand in. Now, let's just mud it like we have everything else. We'll start with a nice thick first coat. Remember, we're going to come back and sand all of this after it dries. There you go. And we've got one other problem over on this wall here. You can see we've got some holes. Well, they're not quite holes. They're bigger than the nail holes we've been working on, but also not all the way through the sheetrock. It's just where some of the drywall got pulled apart when we took off the shelving material. Now, I don't think these are so bad that we need the fiberglass mesh tape to fix them, but it is going to take a lot of drywall mud. So we're just going to really slap in the mud on these, and you're going to see after a day of drying, it's probably going to crack. That's okay. We'll sand it tomorrow. We'll put on another coat, we'll sand it again when it dries, put on another coat, and it's going to turn out just fine. All right, that should do it for the closet. Okay, now that we're done with the easy stuff in the closet, let's tackle something a little bit more difficult. Remember here above the sink, we had some mirrors that were a little too low. We want to raise those, which meant raising the light fixture as well. Well, we have a new hole drilled out for our light fixture box, and the old hole needs to be repaired. So how do we do that? Well, there's a lot of ways you can do it. The pros would probably recommend that you cut the drywall out to the studs and then insert a piece of drywall, screwing it to each one of those studs. And you can do that. But there are easier ways as well. You can go to your hardware or home improvement store, and they actually sell a piece of mesh, a metal piece of mesh that goes on top of this, and then you can just mud that in place. But then you're spending money. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to recycle the piece of drywall that we cut out above and use that as my patch. Let me show you how. In order to do this, I can just use some simple pieces that I recycled from the demolition. The piece of drywall from cutting out the hole for the new box. I've got a couple pieces of wood here that I've gotten out of the closet when we tore out all of the shelving. And all I need are a few drywall screws. I'm just going to fish scrap piece of wood into the wall there. I'll hold this one up here a little bit snug. Watch out for your wires. And then we'll just screw it in. Next, let's put in our piece that we took off. Just kind of center it as best as we can. And there we go. Now I'll go ahead and throw in a little material as a backer in these larger gaps here. But once we throw on the fiberglass mesh tape and mud it, it's going to look as good as new. Again, don't worry too much about what this first coat looks like. It's just a base. We've got several more coats to come. So that'll pretty much do it for today. I just got to finish this other hole and these small ones here, and then we have to let it dry overnight. We'll be back tomorrow for our next coat of mud. Okay, welcome to day 2 of our drywall repair project. Today is all about sanding. That's right, all of that work that we did yesterday, we've got to knock down the rough edges, and then we're going to put on another coat of joint compound, let that dry overnight, and then we do it all again tomorrow. So we got a lot of work to do. Let's get started. And that should just about do it for today. A couple of quick notes. First of all, you might have noticed that I poured a little water in with my joint compound. That's just to thin it out. It makes it a lot easier to apply, not to mention after I've sanded this, there's going to be a ton of dust on the walls, and when I throw the mud up, it's going to drag some of that dust and really thicken up my mud. So I actually put water in here a couple of times just to keep it thin. That way it applies real nice. Tomorrow when we come back for what we call a skim coat, you'll see me thin it down even more so that it really fits inside of those areas that still need joint compound. So that's pretty good for today. We're going to let it dry overnight. We'll come back tomorrow, go through this whole process again. See you tomorrow. Welcome to day 3 of our drywall repair project. And really day 3 is going to be a lot like day 2, a lot of sanding and a lot more mudding. So rather than bore you with that footage over and over again, I thought, let's just wrap up this episode of DIYnot. Well, actually, suddenly it occurs to me that I should probably share some of the techniques of applying mud with you before we wrap up this episode. So, first of all, It's a good idea to thin out your mud each day. So we've talked about this briefly before, but each day when you start to add another layer of mud, go ahead and throw a little bit of water in there and thin it out so that each day it's a little bit thinner than the day before. Another tip is that with each application of drywall compound, that strip should get wider and wider, and the reason for that is it allows that repair to blend or feather into the wall more seamlessly. Another consideration is that for each day that you're adding more joint compound, you're actually going to pull more of it off with each pass. The idea being is it's thicker on day one, a little bit thinner the next day, and then the final coat, which we call a skim coat on day 3, is the thinnest of them all. It's just there to help you fill in the imperfections from the previous days. And let's talk a little bit about how you hold the knife when you're applying the joint compound. Thank you. Usually you're going to press pretty firm to get all of the joint compound off in each one of your passes, but the other thing you'll want to do is twist it a little bit depending upon the direction that you're going, and that'll help keep some of the lines out of the previous passes on your drywall. And finally, don't worry if your first drywall repair looks a little sketchy. This is something that you get better at with practice. So the more repairs you do, the more practice you get with that drywall mud, the better it's going to look in the long run. And I think that should wrap up this episode of DIYnot. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Your words were a little different.
They were, I know. I change things up all the time. Let's do it again. And I think that should wrap us up for this episode of DIYnot. What did I say last time?